Welcome back to Brew Biker, where we're in the middle of a really cool Yamaha WR250R build. In the last episode, we tore down all the bodywork and got all the plastic off the bike, getting her set up where we can get down to the nitty gritty. In this episode, we're going to be picking right back up where we left off. So if you haven't subscribed yet, click subscribe so you can follow along. Now these passenger foot pegs are just held on with two 5mm Allen bolts. Super easy to take off. Just take those bolts loose. There's one. There's the next one. This is easy. It's just held on by 8mm bolts. So go ahead and crack those loose. And they come right off. I'm going to eliminate these factory front fork reflectors just because I don't want the weight of the bracket on there and I don't need them. These are 10mm bolts going through the front fork triple trees. So just break those loose with a 10. Go ahead and pull them all the way out. Those will come all the way out. We're going to discard the reflector bracket, but we want to keep the guide for the front brake cable. We need that. So that's going to go back on. And before we stick these bolts back in, we're going to make sure to hit those with blue Loctite. Definitely don't want these things backing out on us. Some blue Loctite in there. Now the torque is really critical on a triple clamp bolt like this. You do not want to over torque this. It can cause problems with your fork tubes. Use a torque wrench and go to the factory recommended settings. So I'm torquing these at 14 foot-pounds. Right there. It's not much. You got to use a torque wrench. You'll never detect that by hand. Right there. I'm going to drain the coolant on this bike, and this is the lower right side or the brake side of the bike, and your water pump is located right here, and this bottom bolt is actually your coolant, also your coolant drain bolt. This is an 8mm, and we'll just take this bottom bolt out, and you can see we're already leaking a little coolant. And once that is out, you can see it's not really flowing coolant at all. So we can hold our, when I take the radiator cap off, I'm going to hold the pan under here as I do that, and then that's going to allow me to catch that coolant and not make such a mess. Now to take the radiator cap off, there's an Allen screw, and I apologize about the strap in the way. I've got the bike on a lift, and I've always got straps on it to keep it more stable. But I think this is a 2.5mm Allen, and there's an Allen screw here that locks the cap in place. Just back that out, and then you should be able to turn that radiator cap right off. And once that radiator cap comes off, you can see it'll just start draining right out. And once it gets some good air in the system, it'll drain right out for you. And there it is. I'm going to take the radiator off, and the first thing I need to do is get this black plastic shrouding out of the way. Now there's a single bolt holding this attached, and it's back here, back behind this radiator hose, this upper radiator hose. And to make things easier, I mean, I've already got this coolant system drained, so I'm just going to drop this radiator hose out of the way to make this so much easier. So I'm just using a regular Phillips here, a number 2, and just backing that hose clamp off. And I'm also going to come down here and pull this 4mm Allen bolt out of the frame that's clipping that hose to the frame. I'll pull that out, and that should allow us to get this upper radiator hose loose. We'll slide that clamp down a little bit to free it up, and then don't expect this to be super easy. This hose has been on there for years, but that right there is enough to give us some pretty good clearance access to that bolt. Now this is a 10mm bolt, and I'm using one of those extensions that gives me a little wobble on the socket on a 1/4" ratchet with a 10mm socket, and I can get right up in here and spin that out. Now I've seen guys really struggle with this, but if you've got one of those little wobble extensions like that, that's a huge help for that. And there's a little bushing that comes out with that, so you want to keep that with that bolt. Now there's a second bolt down lower in this area. If you get your head up in here and look, I'm sorry it's not showing up on the video, but you can get that same tool, 10mm up in there, and take that one out. There we go, and then this just comes right off. Now I'm going to go ahead and loosen these 2 lower radiator hose clamps on the lower radiator hose. I'm not going to worry about, I'm just loosening them. I'm not worrying about pulling the hose just yet, because we're going to take the radiator loose, and by having these loose we'll be able to just yank that out. Let's slide those out of the way. Now from the front side of the radiator, there's 2 bolts holding this on. You got one here and one here, and these are 10s. Be careful not to bash into your radiator and bend those fragile aluminum fins. The bottom one is a bolt, the top one is a nut on a shaft, and now you can pull your radiator out a little bit. And now with that free, we're able to kind of move the radiator around a bit and get a little bit more access to things. At the top, you've got an overflow tube. You can move the clamp on it just with your fingers. You know, you don't need a tool. It's just a nice little wire clip, and then work that hose off, that little overflow tube. It might be a little tough if it's been on there for years. And now we want to take this fan loose, and it's held on with 10mm bolts, 3 of them. You got 2 on the outside, one here, one here. Now the fan just plugs in underneath, but that plug's a little tough to get to. You don't want to yank on that and damage the electricals. So at this point, for me at least, it's easier just to pop the fan off for the time being. Okay, there's that one. And then that frees the fan up where we can lay it back out of the way for now. At this point, the only thing we have holding the radiator on is we've got the lower hose, which we've already taken the clamps loose from it, so we should be able to just muscle that right off. I dropped one of my clamps there, but no problem, we got it recovered. And now I've got the top, the small tube on top. And this is the type of clamp that we'll use a pair of pliers to squeeze and get that off. Let me grab a pair of pliers. So using a pair of pliers, I'll just pinch that hose clamp, pull that down on the hose a little bit to get it out of the way. Always be a little gentle with these things. You don't want to damage them and have to buy a new one. Then we should be able to pull that right off. And there it is, the radiator's out of the way.